Planning Committee. Before we start, I just need to draw your attention to a few housekeeping matters. There's no expected fire alarm today. Therefore, if the fire alarm does sound, follow the fire and emergency procedures that are applicable to the Council House. This meeting will be broadcast live on the internet and will be capable of subsequent viewing. So please remember, by entering into the chamber and during the course of the meeting, you are consenting to being filmed and to the use of these recordings for webcasting. Please can I ask for that reason that you use the microphones and speak very clearly and distinctly at a short distance so that you are properly recorded and we can all hear. And then when you have finished speaking, please switch your microphone off. And please, obviously, all mobile devices should be on silent now. Thank you very much. So we move to apologies. Do we have apologies?
Yes, Chair. We have apologies from Councillor Stevens, Councillor Allen, and Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Rainsford is substituting for McCarthy.
Thank you. So as Councillor Stevens has provided apologies today, I am acting as chair, and I would like to propose that Councillor Bridgman is appointed vice chair for this particular meeting. Please could I have a seconder? Thank you very much. Lovely. Shall we all approve that? Thank you. Excellent. So declarations of interest. There are three major items. Does anybody have any declarations of interest? Thank you. We move on to the minutes of the meeting held on the 23rd of January 2025. Thank you. I'll propose that they're agreed. Anybody? Thank you. You're seconded. Lovely. So I'll sign the minutes. Item 4, Chair's urgent business. I have no items of Chair's urgent business. Item number 5, questions from members of the public. We have received one public question from Mr. Jack Spooner. As Mr. Spooner is unable to join us today, we'll send out a written response, and both the question and the response will be included in the minutes of today's meeting. Thank you. So we'll move on to 3 planning applications for the committee's consideration. So moving to the first one, 6-1, the Grenville Hotel. The applicant is Mr. A. Cotterell. The application is within the Sutton and Mount Gould ward, and the recommendations are to grant conditionally. Now, I've had today an email from Councillor Sue Dan regarding this, and she's asked me to pass on her thoughts to you. Can I please ask that the committee is thanked for their previous thoughts and comments on this application, but as the last planning refusal was overturned on appeal, and the recommendation is to now approve the application for flats on this site, there is nothing we can do. I would like to say that the decision on whether this property could be an asset of community value has still not been made by the council. And therefore, I'd like to just hand straight over to the case officer, Sam Lewis, to run us through the presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The proposal before members is the conversion of the Grenville Hotel's ground floor to 3 flats. The first floor was previously converted to 3 flats following permission being granted in 2017. The application was previously discussed at the 12th of December meeting of this committee, whereby members were minded to refuse the application on 2 grounds. Firstly, that insufficient evidence to justify the loss of the community facility had been provided, therefore leading to conflict with JLP policy Dev 18, and secondly, that the proposal provided insufficient outdoor amenity space to serve future residents, contrary to JLP policy Dev 10. The committee agreed to defer decision in respect of the application to allow further consideration of the implications of the updated National Planning Policy Framework, which makes significant changes to the council's 5-year housing land supply position, which had been published on the day of the committee. Following consideration of these implications, the JLP authorities can no longer demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply and are only able to demonstrate a 2.53-year supply. This means that the presumption in favour of sustainable development set out in paragraph 11D of the National Planning Policy Framework applies for decision-making purposes. As such, significant weight must be given to the provision of new dwellings. As has just been referenced, alongside this, members will recall that officers previously refused a similar scheme at the site, which was submitted with significantly less information in support. Since the December committee meeting, this application has been allowed on appeal, with the inspector taking into account the information considered as part of this current application. The inspector's conclusion is on the screen now, with a more significant extract from the appeal decision in the officer's report provided in advance of the meeting. The inspector considered that the 2 tests of Dev 18.6 had been met, so that the area was served by suitable alternatives and that the community facility had no reasonable prospect of continuing. No concerns relating to Dev 10, so the outdoor amenity space concern, were flagged by the inspector. The scheme before members therefore already has planning permission and work to implement it can commence. As with the previous framework-related points, significant weight must be given to this appeal decision. As an aside, no decision has been made on the latest nomination to add the property to the Asset of Community Value Register, and members are reminded that this is not a material planning consideration and therefore is afforded no weight in the balance. As such, officers continue to recommend that the scheme be approved. This is due to the view, as set out by the inspector, that the scheme accords with Dev 18.6 due to the information provided relating to alternative provision and viability, plus the now increased weight which must be given to the delivery of new housing. Thanks.
Thank you. Well, we have discussed this at quite a considerable length in the past. You've heard things come right up to date, but we'll now open it up for discussion by members of the committee. Any further thoughts? Councillor Smith?
Thanks, Chair. Can I suggest that we just move to voting on it, because, I mean, there's nothing we can do because that appeal's been granted.
Are the rest of the committee happy with that?
I'm happy to second that, Chair, that proposal.
Thank you. Shall we show hands on that one? Thank you very much. In that case, we'll follow Councillor Smith's suggestion and we'll move straight on. So, you're very familiar. We'll take a vote. And obviously, green will be in favour of this, red against, and amber for abstain. So would you please vote now? Thank you. Thank you very much. I can declare that we have passed that item. Thank you. Shall we move on to 6.2, please? Item 6.2, which is the Old Dairy. The applicant is Mr. Nathan Stonecliffe, and the application is with the Plymouth Earl Ward, and the recommendations are to grant conditionally. Do we have the case officer? So I'll hand over to the case officer, and we'll go through the presentation on the Old Dairy. Thank you.
Thank you. The proposal before members is the removal of part of the front boundary wall of the Old Dairy, a residential property on School Lane in Plympton within the Plympton St Maurice Conservation Area. The site sits just to the east of Plympton Castle. This photo from the 1980s shows the property in its previous use as a dairy, and the wall can just about be seen. When I say it can, I mean it's very, on this it's very, you can just about, I can't point, but you can see it on that picture. The application seeks consent to remove a portion of the wall shaded in the plan on the screen, which is approximately 7.7 metres long and approximately 1.5 metres high. The newly created wall end would be capped with blockwork to match the existing, retain the 45-degree angle of the existing wall, and be finished in lime putty, again to match the existing. The applicant considers the wall to be leaning inward, and the application is supported by a structural engineering report. The report found that the section of the wall the applicant proposes to remove currently leans inward, with a typical measurement of 60 millimetres over 1800 millimetres, in contrast to the rest of the wall measuring between 10 and 20 millimetres over the same period. So that's the existing elevations there showing the wall in full, and then the proposed there showing what would be removed, and then the capping as set out. The report that we've received asserts that the movement of the wall likely results from a combination of traffic vibrations, plant growth, and the site's topography. It concludes that the wall as a whole is vulnerable if theoretically stable, and that the identified section should be removed as a safety measure. Some photos which were provided as part of the report are on screen now. The Plymouth St Maurice Conservation Area Appraisal and Management Plan identifies the survival of historic limestone walls such as this, a key characteristic of the conservation area. Officers acknowledge that the wall adds to the tight and enclosed streetscape and provides a vertical street surface which provides character to both School Lane and the wider conservation area. Officers have consulted with Historic Environment Officer, who raised no objections to the proposed work, nor recommended any specific conditions in relation to the scheme. It is the view of the Historic Environment Officer that proposed works would be at the lowest end of less than substantial harm and result in only minimal loss of character to the conservation area. The reduced section of wall would still measure between 2.2 and 2.7 metres in height on the street side. This height would be in line with or exceed other historic limestone walls throughout the conservation area, and consequently would not represent a significant degradation of character compared to the wider area. As per paragraph 215 of the National Planning Policy Framework, where a development proposal would lead to less than substantial harm, it must be weighed against the public benefit of the proposal. The loss of the section of the wall would be balanced by works to make good the remaining south and west facing walls of the historic garden already undertaken, and to better preserve the remaining elements of the boundary wall against further degradation, protecting its presence within the existing streetscape. The works would also remove a potential danger to members of the public. It was queried with the applicant whether repair would be an alternative to the proposed partial demolition, but this has been advised that while remedial repair works have been undertaken, including the clearing of vegetation and the repair of loose stonework, it is the view that the wall is too dangerous and further repair works are not a valid path forward, and that this is supported by the structural report received. Finally, there were also concerns flagged relating to amenity impacts on the property directly to the east of the site, pertaining to views between the two properties' windows. Officers are not of the view that the proposal, directly to the west, sorry, not to the east, pertaining to the views between the two properties' windows. Officers are not of the view that the proposal would significantly alter the existing arrangement between these two properties. As such, officers consider that the removal of part of the wall would lead to less than substantial harm to the character of the conservation area, which, when balanced against the benefit of preserving the rest of the wall and removing the likelihood of further deterioration of the situation, leads to the view that the level of harm proposed is not significant enough to warrant refusal of planning permission. Is therefore the recommendation to grant the application. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Now we have two speakers on this, the old dairy. Could I ask Councillor Beer to come forward? And I'm sure you're very familiar with the process. You have
Thank you, Chair.
5 minutes. Do you wish me to be reminded? Or
Just in case I do start rabbling on a bit more than I should, perhaps you might reel me in.
Thank you. I'll ask Democratic support to keep an eye on
Put the clock on.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good evening, and thank you for allowing me to speak on this application. Those of you on the committee who know me well will understand my passion for my ward and its historical assets. It's my firm belief that such assets like this wall should remain in its original state for the following reasons. I refer to the National Planning Policy Framework of December 2024. I quote that policy. 202, heritage assets range from sites and buildings of local historical value to those of the highest significance, such as World Heritage Sites, which are internationally recognized to be outstanding value. These assets are an irreplaceable resource and should be conserved in a manner appropriate to the significance so that it can be enjoyed by their contribution to the quality of life to the existing future generations. Policy 2.8, local planning authorities should identify assets in particular of significance of any heritage asset that may be affected by the proposal, including by the development affected the setting of a heritage asset. Taking into account of the available evidence and any unnecessary expertise, they should take this into account when considering the impact of the proposal on a heritage asset to avoid or minimise any conflict between heritage assets, conservation, and any aspect of the proposal. Policy number 210B, in determining applications, local planning authorities should take into account of B, the positive contribution that the conservation of the heritage of the assets can make and sustain communities, including their economic viability. Policy 2.12, when considering the impact of the proposed development on the significance of the designated heritage asset, great weight should be given to the asset's conservation, and more important, the asset, the greater the weight should be. This is irrespective of whether any potential harm amounts to substantial harm, total loss, or less than substantial harm to its significance. 2.13, any harm to the loss or significance of the designated heritage asset from its alteration or destruction or even development within its setting should require clear, convincing justification. Where the development proposal will lead to less than a substantial harm to the significance of the designated heritage asset, this harm should be weighed against the public benefits of the proposal, including, where appropriate, securing the optimum viable use. The harm would be less than substantial when the asset in the whole conservation area is looked at in its entirety. So that was policy 215. Now, following on from this, I'd like to draw your attention to Dev 21, Development Affecting Historical Environment. I'm sure that our colleagues on the Planning Committee will be aware of this policy. I'm quite happy to read it out, Chair. Development proposals will need to sustain the local character and the distinctiveness of the area by conserving and, where appropriate, enhancing its historical environment, both designated and non-designated heritage assets and their settings, according to the national and local significance. The following provisions will apply. Thank you. The significance and character of the setting of the distinctiveness of the heritage asset should be considered within an appropriate assessment. Great weight should be given to the conservation and the plan area designated heritage assets. I could go on, Chair, but unfortunately my time's running out, and I would ask the committee to refuse this. Thank you.
And we have another speaker, Linda Elsey, please. Thank you very much. You also have 5 minutes. Do you wish to be reminded?
Please.
Yeah, a minute before.
That's okay.
Thank you. Thanks.
So,
Good afternoon. I'm Linda Else, elected Chair of the Plymouth and St Maurice Civic Association, and I speak on behalf of and for its members. The Old Dairy falls within the conservation area of Plymouth and St Maurice as described in the Heritage Statement and within the Plymouth and St Maurice Conservation Area Appraisal Management Plan published in January 2008. Councillor Terry Beer in her submission has already covered the legislation and principles that should be applied to development within the conservation area. I do not need to repeat them here. Looking in more detail at the application, while the house itself is not of historical importance, the wall is an old historic limestone wall that has been in place for many years and was originally part of the dairy. This wall is a key characteristic of the conservation area, and as noted in the management plan under Principle 7, such historic surfaces should be retained, enhanced and restored. The management plan also notes that the piecemeal loss of original character, such as walls, impacts significantly on the character of the conservation area. Looking at the evidence provided, in the heritage statement, the architect states that the wall is severely bulging and leaning into the house. It could collapse at any time in high winds. The historic environment consultant describes the wall as being of historic importance that adds to the character of School Lane and the conservation area. They state that the application has a little convincing justification for the extent of the wall reduction, as the bulge in the wall is not visible from the documentation provided. The structural engineer's report agrees that convincing justification is required for the proposed destruction, stated to be by just around 8 metres, just over 26 feet in length, and around 1.5 metres, just under 5 feet in height. The engineer also states that the lower portion of the wall bows over 4 centimetres, 1.5 inches over the first 5 metres, which is 16 feet, and the lean is 1 to 2 to a maximum of 6 centimetres, which is just over 2 inches. Since the reduction in height will not result in the removal of the bowed section, it's not clear how reducing the height will solve anything. The engineer states that the wall shows no evidence of new cracking or movement and that it can withstand high winds. He says it is theoretically unstable. However, the word theoretically has been used judiciously here, so it is important to interpret the statement in the context of the wider report, which offers no substantive evidence to support the position that the structure is unstable or structurally unsound. Therefore, it should be treated as just unsubstantiated supposition, which could be applied to any structure of this size, age, and historical importance. In direct contrast, much of the report seems to directly contradict the case that the structure is unstable, as it explicitly states there is no evidence of new cracking or movement, is unlikely to collapse, and that it can withstand high winds. This opinion has withstood some robust real-life scrutiny, as shortly after the application was made, the area was subject to the ravages of Storm Bert, with wind speeds significant enough for an amber alert being issued to the whole area. Throughout the storm, the wall remained intact and has apparently not moved since. He notes the possible impact of vibrations from traffic on School Lane, but this is minimal. It is inaccessible to goods vehicles and for most of its length is a single car width wide. I can confirm as a resident that traffic is, even at very busy times, very light. It is not by any stretch of the imagination a rat run. There has been no attempt in the application or engineer's report to look at alternative options such as repairs, repointing and potentially adding additional support with a new buttress or two on the house side. The engineer confirms that he has not investigated this at all. Therefore, every effort should be made to retain and repair this wall. I note the case officer has discussed with the applicant whether repairs are feasible, the applicant stating the wall is too dangerous to repair. However, it doesn't appear that they've considered this in detail, and this statement by the applicants is not supported in the engineering report, which only refers to it as being theoretically unstable. To be quite frank, if every historic wall in Plymouth and St Maurice with a bulge like this was put forward for demolition, height reduction or removal, then there wouldn't be any left. Therefore, in summary, taking into account all the information, it's clear that neither the applicant, architect's heritage statement or engineer's report have adequately considered the Conservation Area Management Plan or the National Planning Policy Framework by providing clear and convincing justification for the significant reduction of this historic wall. nor is there any evidence that sufficient consideration or investigation has been carried out on alternative options, such as its repair and restoration, as required by the 3 principles of the Conservation Area Management Plan. Therefore, it is the strong recommendation of the Plympton St Maurice Civic Association that this application should be refused. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Right, well, we don't have a speaker to put forward the argument, but you've heard a lot from the planning officer. So let's open this for discussion. Councillor Watkin.
Thank you, Chair. Just wondering, how long has this wall been sloping? These houses were built a few years ago. Presumably, some sort of report was done at that time, and therefore there ought to be some indication as to whether that wall was sloping at that time, whether it should have been repaired at that time.
This is not information that we have.
Sorry, it has obviously been repaired quite a lot, hasn't it?
I mean, as far as I'm aware, I suppose I should probably set out before I go further that I'm not the officer on this case, so I'm not party to every discussion that's been had. I'm picking this up for a colleague who's unable to be here. But as far as I'm aware from the discussions I've had with the officer who's dealt with this case, that certain remedial works have been undertaken. I think, like I said, there's been vegetation removed, some of the stonework has been redone, and I'm imagining, looking at the, that's been capped at some point on the end later. I mean, that's not an original capping, I wouldn't have thought. So there has been work done to this wall at some point over the years. But that's that's the information I have on that.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Rainsford. Oh, sorry.
Yes, can I ask, the wall itself looks as though it's had a dual history in the sense that the lower part of the wall looks as though was the original. It's quite a different colour stone, and then it looks as though it subsequently was built up over time. Is that actually the case?
I don't know.
Councillor Darcy.
Thank you, Chair. No discourtesy is meant to the planning officer, but it is somewhat frustrating that we don't have anybody here who can tell us about the history of this wall. We've heard from speakers, and it was very informative, and when I read the papers this morning, had mixed views on the application itself. I was going to ask the officer, was the wall, had it bowed since the development of the property on the site, because clearly that wasn't the original property of the dairy. It seems to have withstood development on site, which would have brought in development equipment and machinery and vehicles. And we've heard about the recent storms that seem to come almost every week at the moment, and the wall is still standing. So I am somewhat surprised when I read the reports that repair or some other structural work could not be undertaken to secure the longevity of a wall that's been there, apparently 18th, 19th century wall. But Chair, it is frustrating that we don't have somebody here who we can ask these questions to. And so, in the absence of any other speakers, I propose that the matter I move that it's refused, or at the very least it's adjourned until we have an officer who's able to assist us and answer these very important questions. But I see Kate motioning, so I'll pause at that point.
Thank you. It might be helpful if I read an extract from the Historic Environment Officer's response, just in terms of the sort of history of the wall, which may help members. So, the boundary wall is a surviving remnant of a garden wall dating to the late 18th to early 19th century, when the parcel of land in which it sits was listed in the tithe as a vegetable garden and house belonging to 3 Scott sisters, whose relation George Scott was reverend at the adjacent church. Typical of walled gardens of the period, the high walls provided a microclimate for vegetables. Limestone was used to create the wall, with rough, coarse rubble bonded with a lime mortar, and is the typical vernacular for the area. Very little of the original garden wall survives on the western side, having been dismantled to allow access for late 20th century housing.
I suppose, through you, Chair, in line with the very nature of conservation, it is a shame that very little does survive, and that's why, in my respectful submission, we should do all we can to retain what does remain. So I'm struggling to support this, and perhaps I'll allow debate to continue, but that's where I am at the moment, Chair. Thanks.
I also have some sympathy with you about not having the full answers, but that was very helpful. Paragraph 30, the officer considers how he's weighed up issues that are raised by the objectors. And then he talks about this very odd issue of less than substantial harm. So he comes to the conclusion that would be proportionate to outweigh the less than substantial harm caused to the character of the conservation area. However, comments?
Yeah, I feel like we haven't got someone here who can answer all the questions, and it makes sense to defer it until we do. It's really frustrating. It's obviously not the officer who has presented fault, but yeah, I don't think it's useful discussing it if we can't get answers that we need.
Could I ask one of the members of the council to put forward a motion to defer the vote on this? I think we'll have to say a little more detail for a reason, though.
Well, Chair, I think what's plainly obvious, and again, no discourtesy to the planning officer who's kindly picked this matter up for his colleague. Members, speakers have raised issues, and particularly one of the issues that I would like to explore today is what remedial work or what other structural work in terms of supporting the wall could take place, and the officer's not able to assist me on that inquiry, and there may be others. So I think at the very least, we would want somebody who's got better knowledge of the wall and what remedial work could take place to secure that it remains in support of the conservation area. That, for me, is quite crucial information that members of the planning committee should be privy to before we're being asked to make a decision on whether, because once it's gone, it's gone. So I think it's important that we have all the information before us rather than opinions. And I note the passage that you read, and I invite you also to consider the Historic Environment Officer. Again, there's an awful lot of supposition in these papers, but without having the benefit of probing, I wouldn't be comfortable in making a decision without having that benefit. So I would propose we defer it on that basis, that it comes back when somebody, again, without any discourtesy to the planning officer, somebody who's got more knowledge of the matter will be able to deal with members' questions.
Councillor Gosling.
Thank you, Chair. I hear what Councillor Darcy is saying, but I think it's unlikely that a planning officer would have sufficient experience and knowledge of structural engineering to be able to make a decision on whether remedial methods to uphold the wall would be successful or not, because that is the privy to a particular skill set. Can I make an alternative suggestion that we move to a vote and refuse this application? That would be my suggestion. I don't think that there would be sufficient information to be relevant to our decisions, which is, can this wall be saved, from an officer report?
Thank you. Councillor Freeman, Councillor Rainsford, and then Councillor Darcy. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. If we are going to move to a deferment, then I would be wanting further information back from the planning officer involved as to why the actual height needs to be reduced? Why are they not taking it down, reinforcing it internally, and then rebuilding it using the existing materials to protect that?
Thank you, Chair. There is potentially a public safety issue here. You know, we've heard that the last windstorm didn't blow it over. But I would hate to be sitting here in 6 months' time and discover that wall has collapsed on a child. I do share Councillor Darcy's concerns and would ask whether or not it is feasible for the applicant to come back, because they clearly haven't provided the evidence against remediating it as part of their pack. It would be helpful to understand why they think that isn't possible before potentially refusing it. So I'd vote for a deferral rather than a refusal at this point, just because I would worry about public safety.
Thank you, Councillor Rainsford. Councillor Darcy and then Councillor Sproston.
Yeah, there were 2 points I wanted to come back on. Absolutely, it's about the surveyors, and that should be the applicant's responsibility in consultation with the local authorities, planning officers, but it's the applicant's responsibility to advance why it cannot be remediated. But I also urge caution that if this is turned down and our decision is recorded without having had all the information, I turn to legal and officers as to whether then this would then be taken out of our hands and it would go to appeal, and the decision would be made for the committee as opposed to it coming back so we can have a proper debate about it. If we're making a decision without having considered all the information, I just throw that out there as something to consider as well.
Councillor Sproston.
Yeah, I actually agree with Councillor Goslin on this in regards to the refusal to vote. We talk about a safety issue with this, and I think that's obviously something we should be looking at. But this wall was kind of built at the same time around Big Ben, which has a 9.1 inch list on it as it is. You know, in that kind of sense, we're looking at a safety issue. But apart from that, for me, I think we should be looking after all historic kind of places in Plymouth. If it is a wall from a clock tower, it doesn't matter. I think it has historical significance. And apart from talking about a safety issue, which I would like to think would be looked at regardless, I see no reason as to not refuse to go to the vote.
Thank you, Councillor Sproston. Councillor Smith.
I completely appreciate what Councillor Goslin and Sproston have said. I don't think we should refuse it right now, largely based on what Councillor Rainsford and Councillor Darcy have said. We don't feel like we have the full information, so we don't really have enough information to refuse it or grant it. Councillor Darcy mentioned that it could just be refused, go to appeal. The inspectorate says you can knock it down and then it's done. There's nothing we can do about it. So actually a deferment gives us the opportunity to protect the wall, whereas a refusal means that we might not. And again, as Councillor Rainsford said, there's a safety issue here, and if we refuse it now without the full information, there's going to be a delay in any further applications or stuff like that, and then something could happen in the meantime. I don't know, I'm not a structural engineer, but you know, deferring it gives them the opportunity to come back with the information that we need, and then we can make a decision as soon as possible on that. So I think we need to defer it.
Thank you. I think that's a very helpful intervention. I mean, just to remind members, and please don't take this the wrong way, we are just talking about a small bit at this end, relatively. I mean, we seem to be talking a lot about as if the whole thing's coming down, but that is not the case. So, just to remind...
Chair, forgive me for the interruption, but that's exactly the point. We don't know. We know which element of the wall we're talking about, but we don't have any information before us to say whether that will affect the security of the entire wall or the whole section. So we don't know that information, and that's why I think we should have that information.
Sir Freeman. Oh, sorry,
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I agree with a lot of the comments here. The issue for me is we do have a structural report right now that shows that the wall is unstable. And that's written down here. And I worry that if we do anything, defer or wait for further information, that is still going to be the same report that we have. I worry about the postman going up that lane, and I worry about a lot of things when we're not actually talking about demolishing the whole character of the wall. We're talking about doing it on a safety issue. That's my main concern.
Thank you. And Councillor Freeman, did you wish to? Councillor Watkin?
I agree with Councillor Darcy and the others who think it should be deferred. I think we can't make a decision without full information, and making a decision in ignorance is not going to be a good decision.
Thank you, Councillor Watkin. I am very torn because I think a lot of information is in the report. I went to a site visit and saw the wall yesterday. However, I sense that there's a feeling we can't make the decision, or you'd rather not make the decision. Does anybody want to propose we defer this? Councillor Smith?
Can I propose that we defer it? And obviously, if people don't want to vote for a deferral, we'll then have to move to a vote on whether we approve it or not. So,
I think we need Councillor Darcy.
Sorry, I thought I had moved earlier. I thought I had moved earlier that we should defer.
I beg your pardon. Did you think?
Subject to further debate. I mean, that's the stance. I'm happy to second it. But I think that's the first option. And if that's lost, then we go to the substantive vote.
Okay.
Chair,
in that case,
sorry, can I just come in then? So what I'm thinking that the members are proposing here is, and you can correct me if this wording's not quite picked up on what you've been saying, but you want to defer for further information to be provided in relation to the structural integrity of the wall. And obviously, as you've said, obviously my colleagues in planning do not have that experience, but that obviously will have to come from the applicant. But is that wording sort of pretty much in a nutshell what the deferral is in relation to?
Councillor Rainsford.
I think we also were talking about expecting the applicant to supply fully the options on remediation that had been explored, because with just saying we'll look at the structure of it again is not quite substantial enough. I think the applicant, we could use some justification for taking the wall down.
Do you want me to just add a few words and then you can?
Yes, thank you.
So that would be defer for further information to be provided in relation to the structural integrity of the wall and any possible remediation.
Councillor Watkin.
I think that information would hopefully come through if they're going to sort of either go back and get a further structural engineer to have a look at it, then obviously officers can go back and give an indication of what information members will be looking for in that report that may come back.
Councillor Darcy.
I was going to invite Ms Park in your reason, it should be applicant-led. So for the applicant to provide, it's not a cost that the local authority should do. This is the applicant's application. So it should be applicant-led, and then the local authority can consider that.
That's fine. I can certainly add that in, so it would read, defer for further information from the applicant to be provided in relation to the structural integrity of the wall and any possible remediation.
Thank you. Well, in that case, I slightly regret this, but I think my sense is you prefer to vote to defer it on these grounds, and we'll ask for the further, it comes before us again when we've got the answers to these questions and more information. So in that case, does anybody wish to second Councillor Darcy's motion? Thank you. So shall we vote? Those who wish to defer, please vote yes. You're voting to defer. Anybody against? Thank you. Thank you. So we voted to defer this decision until we receive more information along the lines that we've asked for. Thank you very much. Thank you. Members of the committee, we can move on to our third application this afternoon, 6.3. Item 6.3 is land at Newnham Road. The applicant is Mr. Neil Hiscox. The application is with the Plympton St Mary ward, and the recommendations are to grant conditionally. I'm going to hand over in the first place to the case officer, Macaulay Potter, and ask him to run through the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This application has been referred to the Planning Committee by Councillors Patrick and Sally Nicholson for the interests of public scrutiny. The application site comprises of a parcel of land immediately north of the now demolished 53 Newnham Road in the Plympton St Mary ward of Plymouth. The site can be accessed from Newnham Road adjacent to the footprint of 53 Newnham Road or from the northeast of Clifton Avenue. The site slopes steeply from the west down towards the south and east boundaries. The trees along the southern boundary are protected under a tree preservation order, and there's 3 of them, 3 lime trees. So this image is looking northwest to the development site from Newnham Road, and that's the junction of Clifton Avenue there. This image is looking southeast down Colebrook Lane. This is how it largely appeared pre-2020. So this image is looking north from Newnham Road to the now demolished 53 Newnham Road, also known as The Lodge, which is was a non-listed 1930s property. This image is again looking north and shows the development site as of August 2024 and as it largely appears today and as we observed on the site visit yesterday. So just a brief overview of the site history. There was a pre-app back in 2022 and positive advice was provided in terms of the principle of 2 dwellings and the renovation of the lodge on site. Later that year, a planning application was submitted and it was refused on habitat loss and was dismissed at appeal. In 2023, a new planning application was resubmitted and the previous refusal reason was overcome and it was granted conditional approval subject to a Section 106 agreement of £35,640 for the ecological enhancement at Hamwoods in the city of Plymouth. So there's some formatting issues there, but that's the site layout plan as previously approved. You might struggle to see, but just draw attention to the configuration of the north boundary in the top sort of left-hand corner of the screen as a sloped bank which contained planting. So following the grant of consent, there were 2 main deviations from the approved scheme once construction commenced on site. So firstly, the reinstated hedgerow on the northern boundary could not be delivered due to a proximity issue involving the position of the approved dwellings and the edge of the site boundary. Secondly, the existing bungalow, known as the lodge, was demolished contrary to the previous application description. In terms of the second point, because it was demolished, the developer could no longer comply with the original description, being 2 dwellings plus renovation of the lodge. Therefore, we are now considering the current application as a proposal for 3 dwellings. It is important to note that the previous planning approval established residential use on site. Therefore, this is a significant material consideration in the assessment of this current application. So, taking account of the above, there are 4 key differences to the previous approval. Firstly, there is a revised northern boundary design. I'll show the differences in a moment. Secondly, the demolition and rebuild of plot 3 rather than the renovation of plot 3. Thirdly, the minor height increase of plot 2. And fourthly, reductions to the garden sizes of plots 2 and 3 as a result of the internal reconfiguration of boundary treatments. So this is the current proposal. So as previously mentioned, if we look to the top left-hand corner of the screen, just north of plot 2, the layout here was previously approved on the boundary treatment as a sloping bank with reinstated planting, that planting of which was shown on the plans as terminating just before the full height dining room windows for plot 2. However, the geometry on the approved detailed landscaping plan confirms that the width along the north boundary of plot 2 varied quite significantly. So at the narrowest point, it was 1.2 metres, and at the widest point, it was 1.7 metres. As we saw in the opening slides, the site previously contained dense vegetation and trees along this boundary, which helped to largely lock the natural structures in place. So reinstating a natural bank without the support of the removed trees, other vegetation, and working with an incredibly narrow width in places between 2 hard structures, the curtilage of plot 2 itself and Colebrook Lane, would lead to structural failure, which indeed did occur as the bank partially collapsed into Colebrook Lane when the developer attempted to rebuild in line with the approved plan. It was at this point we started to explore different options with the applicant. One option was to rebuild from scratch as a full Devon hedge bank, which typically has a base width of 1.8 metres. However, this simply could not be implemented in places due to the constrained geometry just north of plot 2 there, and would have likely given rise to maintenance pressure for occupants of plot 2 given the very close proximity. Additionally, we did explore the option of the applicant purchasing part of Colebrook Lane to free up the constrained parts of the northern boundary, but this sustained an objection from the Highway Authority with this proposal. I'll show some designs shortly, but the current scheme is therefore a good balance between having a retaining wall with natural planting along the top part of Colebrook Lane and rebuilding the Devon hedge bank along the bottom within the curtilage of plot 1, where there is far more space to accommodate the required geometry. So this is the boundary treatment plan supplied with the application, and it basically sets out the planting schedule and the types of boundary treatments within. For example, the faint yellow line just north of plot 1 is the proposed Devon hedge bank, of which the specifications are on the drawing there on the left, bottom left. So here are some 3D visuals of the previous approval, noting the sloped raised bank adjacent to plot 2 and the retaining wall adjacent to plot 1, just on the top left there. So this, I'll flick between the two just to sort of highlight the differences, but this was a design that was initially presented prior to the submission of the current application. Essentially, the bank and the retaining walls have been swapped, with the Devon Hedge Bank proposed on the left and a rendered retaining wall on the right. Although it was initially proposed as being rendered to match the materials palette within the site, it did present as a harsh feature facing onto Colebrook Lane. This is the revised and final proposed, These 3D visuals were submitted with the current application for consideration. It proposes the removal of the white render and replacement with a stone wall faced with a timber fence on top of the structure. This is the revised and final proposal presented on which the recommendation is based. The northern boundary retains the stone-faced wall, which officers consider to be a very high-quality feature, and now includes planting on top to soften its appearance and helps to retain some limited character of the previous natural features on Colebrook Lane. These are just some construction images. This is how it looked back in October of last year, so with the timber wall on top of the stone wall there, stone retaining wall. These are some visualizations of how the site would look if the revised plans are implemented, which I can come back to this one. Just note that the Devon Hedge Bank on the left there, and that's looking up Colebrook Lane. This is the elevations for plot 1, and these are the elevations for plot 2. These are the elevations for the lodge. That should say plot 3 up in the top left there, not plot 1. This is plot 3 as approved under the 2023 planning application. And this is plot 3 as proposed under this current application, and as you can see, it is identical to what was previously approved. Officers note that whilst the applicant should have consulted with the planning department on the demolition of plot 3 beforehand, it is emphasised that the issue lies with the unauthorised activity of demolition rather than the proposed dwelling itself. Therefore, the officer assessments on this particular unit are consistent with the previous planning approval. The plot is in close proximity to the lime trees, so in terms of pruning pressure, officers recognise that this was an existing factor over many decades with the previous 1930s lodge and its associated residential use. On this basis, whilst there may be a slight increase in pruning pressure, it is not considered to result in any demonstrable harm when considering the long-established residential use of this part of the site. Moreover, the design of plot 3 is inset at first floor level and includes new protection measures such as gutter guards, which is considered a positive design feature in terms of minimising pruning pressure. Having taken account of the aforementioned considerations of pruning pressure, officers have recommended the removal of permitted development rights to ensure that there are no alterations to the roof space of plot 3 unless agreed in writing. This is the garage elevations for plot 1. In conclusion, and for the reasons set out throughout the report, the recommendation is to grant conditional approval subject to a Section 106 agreement. The agreement is set out in Section 11 of the officer report and proposes the value of £35,640 to go towards potential future ecological enhancement at the Newnham Nature Reserve, not far from the site. I must add that the published report states that the recommendation is to grant conditional approval, but this should say subject to this 106 agreement. This will be updated accordingly if members are minded to grant permission. That concludes the presentation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Officer. We have 4 speakers on this item this afternoon. So I'd like to call first of all on Councillor Sally Nicholson, Ward Councillor, if you'd like to come. And you know you have 5 minutes. Would you like to be reminded?
No, it's okay. Thank you, Chair.
It's okay. Lovely. Thank you. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Chair, members, thank you for giving me this opportunity to address you today, having referred this application to Planning Committee for consideration. As ward councillors, Councillor Patrick Nicholson and I use our best endeavours to resolve planning issues raised by residents, directly with the planning officers and developers. But in this case, our concerns have sadly failed to be satisfactorily addressed by the applicant, and we therefore need your consideration and support to improve this proposal. This site for many generations had been a lovely woodland providing a natural haven for many species of animals within a densely populated area of housing and commercial units in Colebrook. This sadly changed when the site was sold and much of the vegetation was cleared. The local community and ward councillors are keen to retain as much natural habitat on the site as feasible and protect the existing trees which have tree preservation orders. The applicant in May 2024 sadly breached the previous planning permission by removing the existing boundary hedgerows in Colebrook Lane, claiming that the permission to build 2 houses could not be contained within the existing site. Despite a temporary stop notice being served for a period, the applicant has continued to build, not in accordance with the consent. Why didn't that applicant reapply in May 24 and adjust his proposal to maintain the hedgerows? Following this breach, the applicant then demolished a character lodge on the site, which has been retained and extended as part of the original approval. He claimed that the lodge was unsafe to extend, yet one would expect applicant to know the conditions of a building when submitting planning proposals. In short, the local community has lost confidence that the applicant will abide by any conditions imposed by Plymouth City Council. That is why reinforcement of the planning committee is so important to know about the issues and decisions of the City Council upheld during the construction of the development in Plymouth. Our request today is the committee to consider refusing or deferring the applications for further consultation within the applicant on the basis that now demolished lodge, which is shown as plot 3 on the plans, reverts to being planted to help restore the massive loss of natural habitat on the site by the construction of 2 oversized houses. My ward colleague, Councillor Patrick Nissen, will address you in further relation to the proposed conditions contained within the officer's report. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, members.
If you could just, Josh, remind me, and I'm a minute to go, please. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, members. Glad to be back at the Planning Committee. Thank my colleague for setting the scene on this site, which has a great deal of affinity with the local population, and that's why there have been a number of meetings, both in the local community, but a number of representations. So my colleague Sally has set the context, and what we are hoping members will consider today is actually the, as Councillor Nicholson has mentioned, the oversized development that the developer has now produced, a long-standing development that has not been in accordance with the original plans. So these things could have been addressed had the applicant come back to the City Council quite a substantial period ago with revised plans, but has continued to develop the site knowing that he hasn't got permission. Now, what we would ask is that given the fact that you've got 2 larger properties than originally proposed, the destruction clearly of the hedge bank that should have been retained in Colebrook Lane, that actually the committee make a stand in terms of trying to maintain greater habitat on the site by not developing plot 3. And if members are not minded to refuse or defer further consideration at that point, certainly we would ask that we strengthen, or the committee strengthen the boundary treatment plan. Now, Mr. Hiscox has gone some way in addressing concerns. But he has, since this application was submitted, if we take from November of last year, we've had 5 iterations of this plan, the latest supplied on the 14th of February. So it's not really had a great deal of public consumption or ability for members to look at that, given the fact that Mr Macaulay and the Council published the agenda of this committee and the report on the 18th of February, 4 days later. The day before the publication of the committee report, the Landscape and Ecological Management Plan was published on the 17th of February, a very good document, but a document that supports the boundary treatment plan. And there are aspects of the boundary treatment plan that would merit further consultation with the committee and with ward councillors. And I would certainly urge you to delegate to the chair and vice chair, in consultation with ward members, the final consideration of the boundary treatment plan as set out in the conditions of the proposed approval. And also, just by way of information, chair members, generally when somebody purchases a property, solicitors do a local search, and there's solicitors present today. They will generally bring up a planning decision notice. They won't delve into a landscape ecological management plan of 40 pages. And so I'd urge the committee to consider an informative added to any potential conditional approval, which actually would state that along the frontage of the site, so along the eastern boundary along Newnham Road, that wooden fencing would not be permitted as part of an overall conditional approval. Now, it wouldn't be permitted as part of the management plan of the landscape, but that wouldn't be known to any prospective purchasers of the site. And the danger is, chair members, that somebody moves into the site, into the properties, they immediately look to try and barricade themselves in. That doesn't sit comfortably with quite a strategic gateway to Colebrook, and it doesn't sit well with trees and natural hedges. So I would urge you to consider doing that. And also in relation to the boundary treatment plan, I would also urge, if you do delegate to the chair vice in consultation with all members, that it becomes a preoccupation condition. Mr Hiscox has a track record, unfortunately, of not complying with the decisions of this council. We need to be at the forefront of trying to ensure that he does comply with the decisions of the council, and that the landscaping should be delivered.
1 minute.
Thank you. Should be delivered prior to occupation. That means he will deliver it because he will be keen to sell his property. If you don't say it's a preoccupation, these conditions may never ever be implemented, and that's a problem with the planning system, Chair. Thank you very much indeed for considering this matter, and we look forward to your support in trying to improve this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nicholson. Thank you. And our third speaker is Rosemary Hamley. Thank you. So again, you have 5 minutes. Would you like to be reminded a minute? No, just okay. Thank you. Please go ahead.
I'm Rosemary Hamley, Chairman of Plympton St Mary Neighbourhood Forum. The forum was formed in 2015 and confirmed in 2019 following a referendum. We are proud that we're the sole neighbourhood forum within Plymouth. We are a non-political and aim to represent the views of locals. Many express their views on social media, unaware that the planning officers do not take this into consideration, so we've tried to alleviate that. The 53 Newnham Road application has caused a great deal of controversy, and yes, I would say anger. This tiny parcel of land has been admired and loved for many years, together with the ancient Colebrook Lane, which is on one of its boundaries, and the lodge, as is locally known. The first we knew was the wanton destruction of this lovely nature area. The initial application was lodged, but refused by Plymouth City Council. An appeal then lodged by the applicant. Before the appeal result was known, another application made. The appeal was refused. Much to the horror of all, the second application was approved. Sorry, did I say the appeal was refused? Sorry, I didn't know if I... This lovely parcel of land is now a complete eyesore. The houses built are too overpowering for the site. The boundary of Colebrook Lane has not only been destroyed, but part of the property on plot 2 built on its foundation. The lodge demolished and the roots of the lime tree adjacent to which has a tree preservation order exposed. We do not intend to list all the issues that this application has caused. There are too many, and these have already been addressed. And here are our thoughts and recommendations. The house built on plot 2 to be demolished. The hedge replaced to its original position and form. We know this is a tall order, but a stand must be taken on developers who appear to have a total disregard for the rules. The lodge should not be rebuilt. Special consideration given to encourage the wildlife back to the area and landscape sympathetically to resemble its original form. A watch on all future works to check that close attention is made to the planning officer's recommendations and carried out to the letter. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Our fourth speaker, please, the applicant, Mr. Hiscox. Thank you very much. You have 5 minutes. Would you like a hint at 1 minute to go? Thank you.
Good evening, Chair. My name is Neil Hiscox. I am actually a Colebrook boy, born and bred. I am the owner of Cornerstone Homes and built my first house in 1992, 33 years ago. We have been building homes in Plymouth and surrounding area since 2001, employing a highly skilled, locally based workforce. Over those years, I have built around 250 high-quality, open market and affordable homes, never once having a stop notice, never once being in breach of planning conditions. I acquired the application site in April 22 from the local Cap family, who had sold their adjoining Colebrook house site to Burrington Estates for 14 detached houses in 2016. The important part, the application site was cleared of all non-TPO trees and existing biodiversity by the family prior to the marketing of the land and myself purchasing the land. It was a cleared site by the owners at that time. I submitted a pre-application upon purchase of the site and proposal retained and refurbished the lodge and built 2 new detached homes. The principle of the application was supported, but a concern expressed about the incursion into the root protection zone area of the protected trees on site. It was designed as such not to incur any future use on those RPA areas. An application for 2 new dwellings and renovation of the lodge was submitted and refused in 2023. The reason for refusal was that the net loss of habitat and ecological value of the site, which was not mitigated. Again, we did not clear the site. An appeal was dismissed for the same reason. A revised application was submitted in November 22, but this time a biodiversity mitigation proposal was agreed, which required an off-site biodiversity net gain payment of £35,640, secured by a Section 106 agreement. I would also add that this Section 106 agreement took over 5 months to go through the system. In the meantime, I started some site clearance in January 2024, having had pre-commencement conditions and draft planning decision. It was out straight after New Year, and I had no other work for my employees. Wasn't prepared to lay them off. So we started to clear the site. We didn't do any building. We started to clear the site in preparation. So, given that we received draft conditions, in an effort to retain my workforce, I jumped the gun and started. I held my hand up, but I did not want to lose my trusted workforce or lay them off straight after Christmas. I was ordered to stop by the council's enforcement officer, which I immediately did after part of the bank with Colebrook Lane collapsed during the site clearance. Whilst reducing the levels, the existing bank of mud and shale proved to be unstable and continually fell into Colebrook Lane and the site. I worked with South West Highways in order to stabilise the boundary of the lane with an expensive stone-built boundary wall, which we certainly didn't budget for. In June, we started stripping the roof off the lodge, which we also investigated. The existing footings, we took pictures and contacted both the arborist and the structural engineers, as it was discovered that the lodge to be refurbished had no foundations, no insulation, and the existing walls would not support the extensive refurbishment proposal. Demolition was applied for with building control, and on receipt of the notice, the building was demolished. At that time, nobody instructed us that we had to have a planning permission to demolish.
1 minute.
Thank you. There was a breach of planning permission which was for refurbishment only. In the meantime, I made several attempts to pay the £35,645 SIL, BNG payment. But the Section 106 agreement, the council had no mechanism to receive it and the designated site at Ham Woods. The council requested new once we demolished the building, sorry, I'm going off track. The council requested a new submission application to include the revised proposal for a new build lodge replacement and to tidy up some of the boundaries of the site and some amended details of the two homes nearing completion. I fully understand why the application attracted some objections on the loss of biodiversity and impact upon the trees. I have consequently assiduously worked with the council office to achieve a proposal with a level of detail which they are now content. This has safeguarded the protected trees, improved the site boundary treatments and incorporated much improved landscape. I'd also like to add that I've paid all the SIL up to date as well. Thank you.
Mr. Hiscox. Well, members of the committee, we've heard quite a lot about this site and its recent history, and you have all the documentation. If I can just remind us that we're talking about the whole application, and the recommendations are to grant conditionally. And then we do have from the objectors some ideas about were we to do that, what we would also consider before we go ahead with the full granting conditionally. So could I have your views, please?
Thank you. Can I ask our planning officer, please, if consent was given to building plot 3, which I'm very wary about, is this likely to affect the trees that were there and the root of those trees? Thank you.
We had a couple of tree officers visit the site, and they identified no roots within the footprint of the lodge, and there's a construction exclusion zone around that boundary. So as long as they rebuild within those parameters, there would be no impact.
Follow on, if I may. Given the various, so I'm just getting back to the slide in question. Given the various, what I would personally would term as breaches here, that is being listed on one of the slides, how much confidence can we actually put into the applicant that they will actually stick to that boundary that's being put in place?
They've erected Harris fencing around the site, so any pushback from that we'll be able to quickly identify that the site is easily observed from the street. So.
Councillor Darcy, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. I'm eager to hear the debate unfold, but I think it might be prudent. Councillor Nicholson advanced in his submissions, and I note that he's emailed everybody, including Kate and you, Chair, with his proposed amendments. And as he's not a member of the committee, it would fall on a committee member to move those, as I understand it. So I'm quite content, having read what Councillor Nicholson has proposed, to move it for consideration in the debate and to move it as a condition, and equally to move the informative as recommended by Councillor Nicholson. I agree entirely with the wording of both. Happy to adopt that. I'm very familiar as a ward councillor for Plymouth and St Mary, and having lived in Plymouth for the best part of 30 years. Very familiar with the site, and it makes perfect sense that the final issues in terms of the boundary treatment are delegated to the chair, vice chair, and the ward councillors. That's not unusual. These are things that we have done in many other developments. So I would allow the debate to continue, but I formally move what Councillor Nicholson has introduced into the debate by way of email, but I take it that it has to be moved by a committee member. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Darcy. Is this? Yeah, okay.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to say, I echo exactly what Councillor Freeman was saying about obviously the previous breaches that the applicant has already, that we saw them on the screen, he's already disregarded several rules by demolishing the lodge, removing the hedge. I'm also concerned, like yourself, Councillor Freeman, regarding the lime trees. They've got TPOs, they should be protected. Will he just say whoops-a-daisy and whoops, that's gone. So in light of that, I'm happy to second Councillor Darcy's proposal, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I've concluded from this that we continue the debate, and then when we come to the vote, we will indeed we will vote on the motion that you've just proposed, seconded by Councillor Bridgman. Councillor Smith.
Thanks, Chair. I think generally this looks like a reasonable application on the face of it, and I think that's proved by previous permission being granted. So I personally am minded to approve it, but as Councillor Darcy, Councillor Bridgman has said, with those conditions, for sure, particularly that making them a preoccupation condition, because there are obviously concerns about conditions not previously being met. So that's where I'm at on this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Freeman.
May I make another suggestion, please? Totally support Councillor Darcy and Councillor Bridgman with the proposal there. Can I make another suggestion? Are we able to, how closely are we able to monitor this build, if approved, to make sure that there are 0 deviations without consent?
Yeah, any deviations that have occurred up to this point have been quickly reported to us. So imagine if there were any further deviations, then we would pick up on it.
Just follow on, sorry. Yeah, it's just the fact that these deviations have happened. One of them being a massive one, demolition of a building without planning consent, which I just find astonishing. But so it's kind of like if conditions are put in to the application, and if the application was approved conditionally today, I really want us to keep a tight eye on this to make sure those conditions are met every step of the way in full, and that there is no opportunity for deviation to happen, because once it's happened, it can't be undone.
Councillor Rainsford.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a couple of questions, if I may, not necessarily related on different issues to do with the site. I am pleased that one of the recommendations following on from Councillor Freeman's is that we're recommending the removal of permitted development rights, which should ensure there are no boundary changes around the edge of the boundary, which is a useful thing to have. In the submissions that came in, somebody was suggesting that the small sites metric was incorrect. Could the officer expand on that and let us know that in fact everything was okay or isn't okay?
Yeah, so our natural infrastructure officers have reviewed the metric and confirm it is correct.
Thank you, that's helpful. And my second point is about the amount of concrete on this site, hard standing, as well as the buildings. And I know that the lodge is being built on the footprint of the lodge. The worry I have with all the very solid hard standing, which appears to be what is proposed, is that the lime trees are very thirsty beasts, and if there is not sort of seepage into the soil and it's just running off down the main road, it'll start pulling water from underneath the buildings and potentially in future risk of subsidence. Was there any discussion about having a more permeable hard standing in front of garages than appears to be as part of the plan?
Yeah, so the, if I go back, yeah, so there is permeable paving within the site. So if you look at plot 1 there, there's quite a lot of tarmac that is permeable. Yeah.
Any further questions, issues?
Thank you, Chair. I'm grateful. As I alluded to earlier, I'm very familiar with this part of Plymouth, St Mary's. I too share other members' frustrations at the disregard for the planning committee, the disregard for the regulations, and whilst I know what the applicant says about his rationale as to why he did what he did and he sought to remedy that and make the payments, the reality is we are where we are. He shared with us that he was an experienced builder and rightly so shared with us he had built many properties around the city. He ought to have known, he should have known the professional obligations to comply with any planning regulatory. So whilst I hear what he's offered as mitigation, I find it difficult to accept an experienced builder would take that disregard for planning. And that's what we often hear as members of this committee, whether it's retrospective applications or I didn't know. And I find it somewhat frustrating when we're dealing with professionals who ought to know and they can't hide behind that. I'm very familiar with this junction. This part of Plymouth was renowned for flooding. Members in the room will know Colebrook has always been very susceptible to flooding on this junction, and it concerns me greatly. Whilst I hear what you say about it being permeable, it frustrates me greatly, and I'm not holding myself out to be an expert in topography matters, but we've gone from an awful lot of natural hedges and plantation and trees, and it's been replaced with concrete and permeable surfaces. It does concern me greatly. And as a ward councillor, and Councillor Nicholson and Councillor Sally Nicholson has already alluded to this, and Ms Hamley has also, with the Plimpton Forum, there's an awful lot of frustration as a result of the conduct of the applicant, and that too is very frustrating. There is no trust, and I think that's unfortunate because there are some aspects of this scheme that actually do look very nice when I was going through the scheme. But I find it somewhat, it's incredulous that we're sat here and being told that I didn't realise I needed permission for demolition. So for all those reasons and my concern, I haven't been persuaded in respect to the flooding and the detritus that will find its way back on to that junction. I am concerned about the flooding, and I appreciate this is touched off in your report, but I'm finding it very difficult to support this application, particularly because of the previous history and the non-compliance. However, I'm one member of this committee, but that's my position. In the alternative, if the committee are minded to support the application, I invite the committee to consider those conditions that I moved earlier.
But we will move on. I think you've made your views clear. Thank you. Councillor Rainsford.
Could I just seek some clarification, because it comes back to whether or not we can trust the applicant, and therefore we need potentially this amendment. Councillor Nicholson talked about the two properties that have already been built and stated that they were over height. They were larger than the original planning permission. Is that actually correct?
So the geometry of those two plots are consistent with the previous approval. There was a minor height increase to plot 2 of, I think it's 130 millimetres. Yeah.
Shall we take up Councillor Smith's proposal that we vote on the application, but we bring in Councillor Nicholson's suggestions? I'm going to ask for those to be read out.
Chair, just to say it was Councillor Darcy put forward the motion, and I think Councillor Bridgman seconded it, so it's Councillor Darcy's motion to include...
Yes, I'm sorry, I just meant Councillor Smith had suggested we go forward.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
And I'm suggesting we take that idea, take up that idea, but bring in Councillor Darcy's motion, supported by Councillor Bridgman, and I'm going to ask for some wording so that it's absolutely clear that now these points are added to the conditions of the application.
Through you, Chair, only if the committee decides to approve the application. If the committee decides to refuse the application through other grounds, then the informative would then come in. So it's only if they approve it. If they decide to refuse it, then it wouldn't make any difference.
Thanks very much. That's much clearer. Does everybody's got that? Thank you very much. So I'll just ask for these points to be made clear. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So I think we're moving forward on the basis there would be an added condition if members were minded to approve. So the suggested wording would be around details of boundary treatment. So notwithstanding the submitted details, a plan shall be submitted to and approved in writing by the local planning authority in consultation with the chair, vice chair and ward councillors to show the positions, design materials and type of boundary treatments to be erected. The boundary treatment shall be completed before the building is first occupied. Development shall be carried out in accordance with the approved details and maintained in perpetuity. And then one added informative, which would sort of build on condition 14 of the application, just to sort of further strengthen that no alterations or additions to the approved boundary treatment would be allowed.
Thank you very much. Thank you for doing that. Thank you. So, members of the committee, we move forward to a vote.
Chair, sorry, I did also ask earlier if we can have regular site visits to inspect the work being undertaken.
Chair, that's not something we would normally add as a condition. I mean, obviously, we've got a planning enforcement team, and they will obviously monitor the site, and I'm sure that information will be passed to them if there are any issues with regards to compliance of the site. So we already have that process in place. So really the committee need to sort of take that colleagues here will take that back to the planning enforcement team and highlight to them that the committee are very keen that this site is monitored.
Thank you very much. That helps. So we'll move forward to a vote to grant conditionally including these additional conditions.
Chair, can I just come in? We're not actually voting on the grant conditionally. What the members are voting on, they're voting to add the extra condition and the extra informative. That's all they're voting on at the moment, is that if they do move forward onto the next stage, which will be the grant conditionally, that those will already be included. So it's just whether they're happy for that extra condition and the extra informative to be included, and then we'll move on to whether they want to grant conditionally with those or an alternative decision.
Thank you. So with that clarification, we're voting to include these additional conditions. Thank you. Members of the committee, then I will now ask you to vote on the full proposal application conditionally. Thank you. Grant conditionally. Thank you. Thank you, members of the committee. We have voted. I think we took some time to take into account all the issues that were relevant. Thank you. So I'll move on to item number 7, planning applications, decisions, issues. Does anybody have any questions in respect of item 7? Thank you. Then we just note that. Item number 8, appeal decisions. Does anybody have any questions in respect of item 8? We're happy to note that. Thank you, that's noted. Then, of course, there's any exempt business?
Through you, Chair, there's no items of exempt business.
Thank you. Therefore, thank you. I can only thank you for your patience. Thank you very much for giving that so much thought. And thank you, everybody else, for taking part. Thank you. Good evening.
Chair, are you going to stay on now for the rest of the year? You've done a great job last time and this time. Do pass that on to Bill.
Thank you, Councillor.